Well, the world's leaders will gather in St Petersburg next month for the Group of 20 meeting. It's a talk fest that has been criticised as too big and toothless, but the decisions are not binding. It has no secretariat and members are often working at cross purposes. Yet it's also seen as an important forum for linking the world's developing economies with the most powerful countries. After the Russia meeting, Australia will become chair of the G20 ahead of the next meeting in Brisbane in 2014. Earlier I spoke to Susan Harris-Rimmer from the Asia Pacific College of Diplomacy at the ANU. Susan Harris-Rimmer, thank you very much for joining me here on Newsnight. Do you think people really understand what the G20 is all about and the role that it performs?
I don't think they do, and I think we need to do a lot more to help people understand, because it's an incredibly important global institution and Australia is an important member of it.
When you talk about an important institution, is it also run the risk of being an unwieldy institution? So many different countries pulled together, not elected in any way, there is no secretariat. Just how effective can it be?
Well, yes, so it is really what you would think of as a discussion group. And it's the opposite to it is the United Nations, of course, which does have the legitimacy because it represents every nation in the world. But a lot of important economic issues there have been blocked, or the ability to have movement has been blocked. And so this is why things like the Group of 8 continue, and this is why the Group of 20, which is at least more representative of the world's economic power than the G8, came into being in the last 5 years.
More representative, but does it pack as much of a punch? Because we know with the G8 you're talking about the biggest economies in the world, but these are not the 20 or 19 as it may be biggest economies in the world.
Well, that's changing, I suppose. So that's why really I think the G8 was forced in many ways to increase the power base for the meetings, because the reality is that the emerging powers of China, India, Russia, Brazil, South Africa are going to be an increasing economic power. So global economic power is shifting, and the G20 is a recognition of that. But
what about decisions that are taken at the G20? They're not binding. How are they actually followed through?
Well, it's a great big dose of peer pressure at the G20. So there's something called the multi-year action plan, and basically states like Australia will go to the G20 and agree to take certain measures itself, in other words, around its financial regulation or maybe labour, mobility laws or whatever it is. It will agree to make certain changes itself, and then it will report back on an annual basis about how it's going on those changes. But really it's a peer pressure kind of club.
Now, with Australia hosting the G20, what extra responsibilities does that bring to Australia? Does it give us more clout?
Definitely does. It's a huge opportunity. It means that we get to, in some ways, define the agenda. It means we can revitalise the institution, so we can make sure the G20 does have some outcomes. We can make sure it has an Asia-Pacific flavour, which it often lacks, often heavily European dominated. We can make sure that us as a strategic middle power, as a pivotal power, remains part of these big conversations, and we have a story to tell that is a very important story internationally. So
is it also
really important.
Is it also part of the branding of Australia, as you've pointed out, as an important middle power, given that we're also now at the UN Security Council, to be able to host the G20? Does it all add to the lustre of Australia internationally?
Oh, it certainly does. Yes, it certainly does. And to be on the Security Council at the same time as the G20, it's like winning the Olympics and the FIFA World Cup and the World Cricket Cup all at once. If you're a foreign policy person, I mean, it's Christmas, but it's only as good as we make it. So they call them systematically important countries, like ourselves, like South Korea, like Indonesia. We do have a special role to play. You know, trying to make sure that globalisation affects smaller and medium economies in a fairer way, you know, trying to inject our voice in that conversation. It's a responsibility.
Now, there's been a criticism and observation that even at the G8, really, it's a G2, the United States and China, that they dominate the international economy to such an extent. Can that also be said of the G20? Is it really ultimately the US and China, and where does that place us?
They're important, but these days China and the US are dependent on the region and each other and the rest of us. I mean, global economics is such an interconnected web. So yes, those two countries are very important, and yes, it would have been pretty scary if Obama had not gone to St. Petersburg, but. It is really about a group of 20. It is a group of players whose economies are intertwined, and that group, because they control 85% of the world's economic outcome, together can actually make quite a lot of impact.
How nimble has the G20 proven to be in the past, particularly dealing with the big economic issues, of course, with the global financial crisis that the world's had to deal with in recent years?
Well, it started off with a bang and it's been whimpering a little bit ever since. So in 2008, the first leaders meeting, there was under Gordon Brown, there was a sense of excitement and there was a mobilisation of resources of over $1 trillion to deal with the financial crisis. Governments can mobilise resources in a way that private capital can't. So there was this mobilisation of resources and this crisis response that was pretty impressive. Now, since then, there has been less impressive. Most G20 experts see the progress as either mixed or uneven or disappointing even. But it's still the best chance we have in a future crisis or with some of these global things that bedevil resolution, like climate finance, like tax evasion, corporate tax evasion, like fossil fuel subsidies. We haven't been able to have progress in the UN, so this is probably our best chance.
Just finally, falling, of course, when it does at a particularly sensitive time here in Australia, is it important that the Prime Minister, Kevin Rudd, attend?
I understand completely all the political reasons why he won't, but it is desperately disappointing. It is also the day, the first week of our presidency of the Security Council, which also falls in the month of September. It is very bad timing indeed. It sounds like probably Senator Carr will attend, and that's fine, but in fact, the leaders' meeting is a leaders' summit, and it does not reflect well on us when we're going to be the host to have organised our domestic political affairs in such a way that our leader does not attend.
Well, appreciate you shedding some light on the G20, what it's all about. Thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome.